Сьогодні в нас дуже гарний гість, молодий, але досить відомий музикант, який народився в Ізраїлі, який навчався в Америці, жив там, працює зараз по всьому світі, багато в Польщі, в Європі. Шахар Ельнатан, композитор, музикант. Сьогодні він з вами буде ділитися своїм досвідом.
It's really cool to see all of you guys, because I know it's not easy to get here and the whole situation, so that's great. I'm really happy. And actually, I would like to understand before we start, actually, because I know very little. Igor was telling me about this whole school, that you practically built this whole room, which is fucking amazing. I told him, in Europe, no students would do something like this. So that's really cool. Maybe can you come to Poland, help me build also something like this as well? Because our topic for today is improvisation, basically. And for me, it's an interesting topic, especially in the sense of what is improvisation? I think that's a question that many people, especially when you study jazz, I think many people in the beginning have certain ideas about improvisation, and then you start learning jazz and you start to ask, what is improvisation? What is jazz? Because somehow improvisation is very much embedded inside jazz music, but suddenly jazz is its own genre, right? So what is just playing jazz? What is improvising? Because there are many people who improvise and they're not jazz musicians. There can be folk musicians. In folk music there's a lot of traditions of improvisations. For me personally, I came very much from the jazz world. My father was a jazz guitar player. I was listening to jazz all of my life. So for me, improvising was always part of maybe playing blues, some jazz, but also rock music, right? Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. They're also improvising. But also for me was very interesting to get to play later on in my life with some folk musicians, for instance, which have a totally different approach for improvising. Very interesting. It gave me a lot as well. So that's why I'm asking. So are you all studying jazz theory, jazz history, in a way? I'm just trying to gather some information so we know better what to talk about, yeah? I can just say, for the past few years, I'm not a teacher myself, but I do give lessons to students that approach me. And one thing that I noticed that is interesting is that I've had sometimes students come to me after a whole 4 years or something in a jazz school, and I've actually experienced this myself, that can play Inner Urge, they can play giant steps and stuff like that, and somehow we end up practicing a G major arpeggio all over the guitar. And so that's also a guitar player thing. It's a very tricky instrument, it's not easy. So I can say myself, I started playing also when I was 6, and the way I started to learn jazz was mainly by transcribing. So yeah, I started by transcribing. That's how my father taught me. Like, you want to learn something, just transcribe it, and that's the best way to learn. So I was doing this for a long time. When I was 14, I was already playing gigs with older people, because I was sounding like Pat Metheny. I had no idea what I'm doing. I just knew how to do this. I had no idea what I'm doing. But it sounded good because I had the language, I had the rhythm in my ear. And at some point I started to say, okay, I want to learn better. I want to know what I'm doing. It's not enough to just have the feel of it, but it is a good way to start, right? You connect to the language. Transcribing and understanding just the basic language, I guess, of, again, jazz. But maybe if you play blues or if you play folk music, it's a different language that you have to learn, right? But what I would like, so the G major scale, right? Why did I speak about that? Because what I later on understood, which was for me right now very important, and I actually find myself many times going back to even like more simpler and simpler basics of music, especially also with students. So I understood like many students can play very difficult, because especially you learn jazz, you want to play everything already. You want to learn all the most difficult things. And in my case, I had to realize that, wait, I don't know how to improvise in the most basic harmony, even diatonic sometimes, triads. I didn't know, I could play many standards, but I didn't know how to play a G major triad. 1, 2. improvisation. So for instance, this is a simple example. When you, also about the question of what is improvisation, what are we dealing with when you're speaking about improvisation? When you gather certain knowledge and you can feel certain elements of music, whether it's in harmony, right? You can start to work with things. So you have even simple harmony. When you understand the harmony, what it means, do you have any kind of harmony class, like even classical harmony? Yes? So do you understand like simple, like tonic, right? Subdominanta, dominanta, these kind of things, yes? I'm sorry, in Hebrew it's probably, I don't know if it's the same here, but tonica, subdominanta, dominanta. Yeah, that's also an interesting thing to think about. In a sense, all harmonies, you can break it down into tonic, subdominant, and dominant. And this is also a way where you can start to change things, you can work with things. So, for instance, when I played now, maybe you can tell, but I didn't use that much of bebop language, per se, right? Because that's something I think many people who study jazz want to dive into bebop, which is great. I've studied a lot of bebop. But I think what's more important, and for me at least, is understanding how melodies work, how lines work. And bebop is a great way actually to learn that. So I really recommend, even if you're not necessarily into playing straight ahead swing jazz, bebop is a great thing to explore. If you learn it in the right way, you really understand what's happening within the lines. And one more aspect that I wanted to touch is that these are all technical things, right? Bebop, lines, theory, these kind of things, which are very important. And suddenly while I was playing right now, I had this, like, for a split second, I had this thought of, like, AI. And I was like, that's an interesting thing as well, because all the things that I was talking about right now, these are things that AI can actually learn and do. I don't know if any of you have ever played around with like AI music generators. Yeah, Suno, this kind. I've tried once. I was playing around with one called Udio, something like this. this was crazy. It's like you can generate something that sounds kind of like the weather report, or you can like ask, like, I want a folk music with the ECM jazz, and it's like I was blown away by how actually good it was. And that made me think a lot, especially when we're talking about improvisation. It's like, fuck, what are we doing here? Like, what are you all doing here? Right? But I think I hopefully have an answer for that. For instance, now I was improvising, whatever, playing on the form, playing this song. At some point, I had this feeling that, oh, that's already enough notes. I wanted to hear something else in the room. It's just the room, or maybe you, I don't know, like, fuck, stop playing. So I suddenly let go of the rhythm for a moment and started just playing something more sparse. Very simple element, you could say, of improvisation. I was listening to some feeling or to something that was happening in the room, and I reacted to it, which, thanks God, I don't think AI would have that capacity to do, right? Maybe it could even copy the style, it can copy many things, technical things, but when we're talking about playing live, playing for people, right now it raises for me many questions, what it means for me and where do I want to grow in that direction. That actually makes sense for you to come and listen to me and not to some hologram, which will look better than me and will probably play better than me, right? actually in this also context is interesting to talk about improvisation, because I think that's right now a very crucial point to understanding actually what is improvisation. Because when you hear an AI generator playing a perfect Charlie Parker solo, it's not a problem. Actually a whole album it can generate, and it does it really well. So then you ask yourself, okay, what do I want? Why do I need to do it? What does it give that I will do it and not this AI? And you also said something that I was thinking about a lot. I had this question for myself. If someone is playing even classical music, a written down piece, for instance, could there be elements of improvisation? And I'm not talking about not changing the notes, but if someone plays a classical piece, is there an element of improvisation in it? Again, thinking in this context of AI, right? Because AI could play those notes perfectly. But I know, because I studied some classical piano when I was a kid. A very small thing, like even just like now, you play a piece and you feel like, wait, a bit of shorter rest right now, because you feel that people need this extra second. He can feel the room. That's a very basic thing that, for me, is actually improvisation. Improvisation is about, I'm alert right now as much as I can to this moment, right? To this song, to those chords, to this rhythm, but also to you, to you, to you, to this beautiful room you built. And I'm trying to feel what is the best thing right now to play. I don't know, I just started playing and this song came out to my head. I was like, I will start to play it, right? So even if parts of the song I know, right, but it's still improvisation because I decided right now in this moment is the right time to play this song. That was my context. For me, that's already improvisation. It's not about me playing necessarily whatever, a bebop solo, right? And to be honest, these days I hear also a lot of people who are very advanced jazz musicians. They play bebop, they play many lines. I also found it in myself that sometimes I can play very so-called improvised, but play lines that I know exactly where they start, where they end, and I play the same. It's very safe for me, and it's actually much easier. Is this improvisation? To a certain degree, yes, but that's why I'm asking those questions, because I think it's all the stuff that we can all think about. Again, what is improvisation at the most basic level? So that's why I'm also glad there are some people that are not from the jazz, necessarily jazz. Because for me, if you ask me, improvisation is something it's not saved only for jazz musicians. To me, it is about understanding music. So whether it's harmony of the music that I'm playing, again, Beethoven, he understood the harmony of, right, the pieces that he wrote. He could improvise. That's why he could improvise. You understand the rhythm, you understand the harmony, you understand forms, right? You understand, and then that's like technical stuff. And then you understand people, you understand situations, you understand even acoustics. You know, sometimes they're really, again, advanced musicians, but I've seen them fail many times because they were just not taking into consideration a very small element of just acoustics. Things like that. I know, I also play drums, so I know sometimes every room can be so different. And it doesn't matter how good you understand rhythm and these things, but suddenly if you come to the wrong room and you play the wrong way, the gig can be terrible. So that's also a good example of some elements of improvisation that sometimes maybe people are not thinking about. It's beyond lines, beyond theory, beyond many other things. And I'm not saying that one is more important than the other. That's also something. I think to be a jazz musician today, at least in my opinion, means to be to have this wide spectrum. I'm also understanding the tradition of bebop and harmony and rhythm. And, you know, jazz has many, in the tradition of jazz, there's so many elements of rhythm that actually don't exist in many other places, so that's a great place to learn it. We have again, harmony language, rhythmical language, melodical language. So you had classical music up until then and folk music, which was mostly diatonic in some form of mode. And suddenly in jazz you have, for example, I've been trying to work on it a little bit lately, which is not easy for a jazz musician, to try to improvise diatonically without chromatic notes. Because in jazz you can play, right? Something that has chromatic notes in it, and suddenly you try to play without chromatic notes, something more like the classical language of melody, right? Something like this. It's for someone who just played bebop all of his life, it's difficult. And I've noticed that sometimes that I'm playing, or myself or with other people, today in jazz music, I think in modern jazz, you actually have also many tunes, people write music that is triads, right? And not just seventh chords, 2-5-1s, which is the vocabulary of harmony that we're used to in jazz. Suddenly, it's not easy to play. I realized that actually sometimes the more simple songs that just have some triads in it, like what I just played now, the Elvis song, in a way it's very challenging for me to improvise in it because it doesn't have the normal jazz harmonies that I'm used to working on normally. that's something not just for guitar players. I mean, I had my young brother, he plays bass, and we were in a jam session one day, and that's actually interesting. And then someone called out rhythm changes. Afterwards, we came back home and we spoke, and I said to him, you know, to be honest, there were many good musicians in this jam session, but I said, to be honest, no one really knew how to improvise on rhythm changes in that jam session. And again, there were some good saxophone players, piano players, and then we started the whole night, we were listening to different recordings of rhythm changes, which is again something that you can consider as something very basic. It's quite diatonic, right? Very simple kind of harmony. And then I kind of was trying to help him also to understand it, as like to help him to teach him rhythm changes. And I was thinking about it. Okay, how do we make it work? Because I saw like there's a funny, I don't know if a funny video, but on YouTube there's some guitar conference from like the 90s or the 80s. It's like all these like guitar greats meeting to play in this huge hall playing rhythm changes. I don't remember all the names who were there, and maybe also better I will not say who they were, but one of them was John Scofield. And we were listening to that, and that was also, it was so obvious that he was the only guitar player in this whole maybe group of 8 or 9 guitar players which were taking solos one after another that really knew how to play on a very high level on rhythm changes. And then we were like, okay, so that's already a good thing to know. You're not the only ones. And then we started to try to break it down, how to play on rhythm changes. We understood that rhythm changes can actually be broken down to 1 and 5. We have 1, 6. Again, speaking about everything can be subdominanta, dominanta, or tonic. 1, 6, that's a 1. 2, 5 is actually a 5. Or you can say subdominanta, dominanta, right? And then 3, 6 is again 1, again 2, 5. So just when you break that, you understand that rhythm changes is just 1 and 5. It's like but it's not funny, because actually if you don't go through that process to understand that it's actually this, it's very easy to get lost in many things. And that's what I felt about all those musicians and the funny thing is that then we started, okay, we're sitting down and okay, let's accompany each other. Really like this. And I have to admit that it was not the easiest to improvise on that, and just this. Is there anyone who wants to comp me on the piano or on a guitar, something just like this? Really, I'm not joking. Come, on the piano even. Is there any pianist? The simpler the better. The worse the better. So don't worry. Good. Hi. Shachar, and you?
Anna.
Anna. So, can we play a B flat major?
I'm a little bit nervous. Can I open the ideal?
No, you don't need. No, we're not playing it. We're not playing rhythm. We're just now playing 1 and 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so B flat major. Do you know B flat major?
Yes.
But not major 7. Try it. Yes, and F7. So let's play that a bit. Okay, we're ready, guys. does anyone else want to try, actually? Anyone brave to play on 1/5? Maybe on giant steps then. No. Yes.
Let me warm up my instrument.
Yes, please do. Yeah. I mean, and this actually brings me back to when I was in high school, in music school, there was one friend who was playing trumpet and he was really into Dixie jazz. And somehow, when we were all studying and we were all playing modern jazz and stuff, I have to say, he was always playing the best lines. Like, he was always playing the nice, like, things that made the most sense. And I think that has a lot to do with that. That's again why I played a song like this. What happened to my... I'm constantly finding myself going back to trying to improvise on very simple things, but good. Because it's not easy to improvise on a simple chord progression sometimes, in a way that all the notes, right, they have the good, not counterpoint, but they land on the right places. That's what the art of bebop is, in a way, which comes from Dixieland, which comes from more simple things. For instance, I have this one song, maybe we will play it in the concert. It's a song that I wrote for my grandmother. It's a very simple song. It goes something like this. that's a very simple song when you listen to it, I think, right? It doesn't sound something too complicated. I wrote this song like probably almost 10 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, something like that. And I recorded it like maybe 2 times. I never released it because also me and also the other musicians never really improvised on it well. And every time they tell me like such a tricky song to improvise, like, and it's not even clear why, because it's just basically, and that's something. So I will give you an example right now. We have here, I hope you understand, B flat, 6. So we have 1 to a G to a 6, and then we have this chord, which is basically a 4 minor, and just on the terza, how do you say, on the 3rd, right? So basically, and then we have that again, 1 to the 6, but to the flat 7. And then again, 1, but this time goes straight to this 4 minor on the 3rd, and then goes to the 6, so it's the opposite. 5, 4, and then this, also this kind of. Basically we go to the 1, but in minor suddenly. So these are things, so what I just did was this small analyzing of the harmony. This is something very important that you will have to know how to do when you're dealing either with the very complicated pieces that you're trying to play, but especially, I'm even talking, even in a tune like this, which is so simple, if you don't know how to analyze it well, you'll have a hard time improvising in a way that makes sense. So for me, at some point after a few years, I just understand, oh, right, it's just a 1 to a 4 minor. Again, 1, 6 is like a 1, 4 minor. So if you know how to improvise in a 1, 4 minor, which is basically very basic element in music, 1 to 4 minor. Again, improvising it in a more jazzy way or whether it's in a more whatever way, but knowing this sound, 1 to 4 minor, you have it in so many music, so many tunes, whether jazz or not jazz. And to understand 1 to 4 minor means also, then it means you also understand 1 to the flat 7. Same thing, it's still a 4 minor, right? So when I have these, for instance, I still think B flat to E minor, E flat minor. Right, so I just think these kind of things. Or if I have this, that's also 1 to 4 minor. 1 B flat. It's basically a 4 minor on the 3rd. So when I start to understand this in a better way, simple, very simple, the simplest chord progressions, things start to make sense. And I think this is very important. It's like important building blocks also when you, that what makes the difference between then the more advanced musicians who really play, I don't know, I was just listening to some album in the car 2 days ago with Joshua Redman. And it's like amazing, you see that that's like a musician who really understands these things. And on any tune, it was like an album with Chicoria, like any advanced tunes, he always somehow makes it make sense. Especially if you go and you start playing with, you know, modern jazz bands and they give you all kinds of music that sometimes doesn't make any sense. And you have to make the sense out of it, make it work. And sometimes it means basically breaking it down, understanding what is it on the most basic level. actually an interesting time because I have to ask myself, what is playing jazz? And I can say that for me, it's exactly these things. It's like, to me, anyone who goes into music and understanding those basic elements of music he doesn't have to be a bebop musician. But if you understand the harmony of the music that you play, right? So harmony is one. You understand the rhythm of the music that you play. Because all these things, when you understand them, it gives you the freedom to create with these, to work with them, to improvise. So if you understand the harmony, the harmonic context of each, how do you say, like the one, again, the four, what's a six, how does a six chord sound, right? How does a two? So it's like learning to hear the harmony. Whether it's a Coltrane song or whether it's a Beatles song, it doesn't matter. But you hear the chord and you know which degree. So that's a very important, that's understanding harmony. Understanding how melody works, which is, bebop is one of the best ways just maybe to understand it because it's just very clever. So I like bebop because in that sense, because you understand how it sounds when you have a chord and it takes you from the 5 to the 3 to the 1, right? It's basically all built on triads and the most basic, so noisy, triadic things. It's just how you embellish them. But it's true, I've actually learned a lot also from some traditional folk musicians, whether it's European folk or Arabic folk. Like they have totally different languages of how to improvise, which is actually very interesting, which is maybe another very important element is working with themes. So, which is for me still under understanding melody. So what makes a good melody? It's usually when there's a right structure and building of a theme, or working with different themes, going around them. For instance, if we're doing Misty, right? I'm playing with a theme, right? But on purpose, I try to play the most simple kind of, again, basically, in a way you could say I composed now a pop song, right? Or some kind of song, because it was just hopefully a good work with a theme. Do do de do. It's actually tenderly. It's another song. Do do de do. That was all actually no bebop lines, just working with a theme, going through the harmony, right, changing it in the right way, developing a theme. So I would say this, working, and this is something that actually in a lot of folk music, where you don't have so many options like in jazz with notes, you just have 5 notes to improvise with. So actually it's all about building a theme in the right way. For instance, in Indian music, and also in some Arabic music, you have that they don't even go, they go into certain registers only when it's the right time. And this is something that for me was very interesting to explore, because also you start a solo, and when you're a jazz player, you can just have, okay, I can play everything, right? The whole neck is open, and suddenly to have this sensitivity, wait, now I'm in this register. Am I ready to go to that register? Oh, I'm opening up this. And this is something that, for instance, if I would never get into the more folk kind of improvisation, I would never think about those things, I think. So that's interesting as well. So what we have, harmony, melody, rhythm, sound. These are universal things. No matter what genre you're gonna end up playing, these are important things. And then I would add this more abstract element, which we started with. It's just also you're playing, in the end for people, we're playing live. So it's just a basic, well, not basic at all, but a sensitivity to a room. It's just like sensitivity when you're speaking to someone, and are you feeling when you're talking too much? Or maybe the other person is bored and you're still continuing to talk, right? So that's a basic sensitivity that you can have the same in music, and it somehow expresses itself in the same way. So that's just maybe a bit more abstract, but it's just a human sensitivity, which can also be in different directions. Again, listening, understanding a certain situation, understanding sometimes it's a social situations. You know, maybe you're in a jam session, maybe you have a friend. I've had some situation where you're like, okay, I want to play that way, I don't want to now, or like I'm in a band, there's a band leader, I'm taking too much attention, I will play less today, you know? Stuff like that, that's also part of playing in the end of the day. Makes a big difference, these things. Improvisation is composing, right? That's the base of composing. Or basically composing in real time. And I've actually noticed that a lot of the tunes I wrote, especially when in the earlier days, but many times I would write even a tune because I had a specific situation in my head, a specific place, specific person that I wanted to play with. So a space can very much be an inspiration, especially also if you're, I don't know if any of you had the chance to play like a church, or like a, you know, when there's a very nice acoustics, that's very inspiring. I play very different when I play in a space like that, or if I play in a small room, for instance. But that's the most basic thing, of course, it's just acoustics. But in general, for instance, I've had this thought, I'm also now having thoughts for myself, like I want to build a studio, so you can all help me come build some. but I've been asking myself these questions because I've noticed how I'm more inspired in certain spaces, if it's certain places in the world to play different things. There is definitely elements like that. It's actually something interesting because it's something that is not being spoken about too much in music schools, at least not in the jazz world. But for me it's a very interesting thing. I know, for instance, I've had the chance to play with an Iranian Persian musician who basically, from what I understood, for them that's like one of the basic things when you start to play music. It's like you work with a room. And that's something, and I've noticed it, I've also have this one project with Kurdish musicians. I don't know, sometimes we play, they have this magic, and I was like, what is this? Like, sometimes we had even like a jazz jam session, I just invited them come. One would come with this frame drum, another is a singer. And every time they came up, there was like an explosion in the room. And I was like, what? It's like some magic, you know? And I was wondering, like, where does this come from? It's like such a specific quality. And then when I was talking to them, I understood like that's part of their training is actually like listening to the space that you're playing in. Whether it's on a acoustic level with the notes that you're playing, but it's also in an almost mystical way. You know, and that's something that also, you know, when you hear Miles Davis play, it's the same. And I start to notice this quality in like very high level musicians that it's just a very, like, the sensitivity becomes more and more precise, right? And so someone comes and he plays a note, and it's very apparent, especially on horn players, but I mean, not necessarily. I think any masters of instruments, whether I've heard there's a klezmer master, you know, he was playing clarinet, the same thing. I felt like Coltrane is on stage when he was playing because something was so total, and the sensitivity was so total that it's like it just takes you, you know. And this is definitely, it's like he's inspired by the room. He listens to it, and he's like, yes, you know, that's the right note. And so it's a bit more difficult to work on this because it's a more abstract kind of concept to work with. Yeah. It's not like learning, okay, 2-5-1. But I think that actually this is a lot of work that you can do also outside of music. Just like I said, it's the same when you're having a conversation with someone. If you're not, in a way, aware of yourself and of the situation, are you saying the right thing? Are you not saying? It's some kind of tact.